Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to Canadian Gothic, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to Canadian Gothic, a nighttime series in which my pal Madelayne Klein and I discuss dark and unsettling stories. But tonight, it's not going to be us doing the storytelling. A few weeks back, we released Volume 3 in my Encounters with Creeps series. And well, something must have clicked with you all, as I've been literally inundated with listener mail ever since that release, and it's time we get caught up. In this episode, I'll again offer Nighttime Podcast listeners the microphone and allow them to share their seemingly endless encounters with creeps. As those listener-contributed stories charge past, Madelayne Klein and I will do our best to unpack each one. So lock your doors, close your curtains, and settle in. It's time for another round of creep encounters. Miss Madelayne Klein, I know you hate it, but I'm just going to come out and ask, what's new?
Not too much. I had a super rough week weather-wise. We got like crazy storms and a lot of snow.
I was out mowing my lawn and you sent me a photo of your yard showing like the snow just piling up.
It was like 3 days of snow. We got like 10 or 15 centimeters or something. It was ridiculous. It was so icy. Everyone was crashing and it was, insane. But it is warming up. Goodbye seasonal depression. Hello regular depression. We are in business.
I mean, like a different tone of depression. You'll have other things you can worry about now.
Exactly. But I'll just do it in sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you'll feel much better. Other than crappy weather, you've been watching anything cool? I in a prior episode, we plugged the documentary Stolen Youth on Disney Plus, and I've heard from so many people writing me being like, "What was that documentary you guys talked about again? I want to watch it." So let's do it again. You watching anything good?
Not in the last week. Okay. I kind of dawdled in the last week, so I had to use this weekend to like film a bunch of content.
Okay.
So I didn't get a ton of downtime. But yeah, nothing that pops out in my head. I'm a rewatcher. I rewatch comfort shows.
Oh, do you? Okay. Yeah, it's like a good old song or something. So I have a few shows like that where I've like X-Files, for example. Nice. Anything in the world could be wrong, and for me, like putting like an old episode of X-Files on is like a warm hug from a nice hug from my mom or something.
David Duchovny can do no wrong. No, so exactly. I get that.
Yeah. I haven't been watching any documentaries, but I have been watching the latest season of the show Succession. You watch that?
I've heard of it, but okay. I don't even know what it's about.
Okay. If I told you, it would sound super boring, so I'm not even going to tell you what it's about, but it's a great show. And the new season is the final season of the show, so that's big. And I really enjoy when a show is willing to be like, this is our final season, we're wrapping things up now, rather than just dragging on endlessly.
Yeah.
And so
that's a good quality to have.
Yeah. Well, it happens all too much that shows don't want to end, and it just ruins everything. And you can point back to, I think the best example is the TV show Lost, that just, I don't know if you watched that, but it just went on way too long. And rather than tying up things, it just kind of had new things that were just contradictions to other things. So having like a firm deadline, I think for a writer, like it's necessary.
Totally. And I feel like they're getting there with Stranger Things. Like I know there's only 3 or 4 seasons, but there's another one coming out, and I'm like, so like the kids are all grown ass adults now. Yes. What are we doing?
Well, it'll be about their kids eventually.
That's I guess.
What they'll have to do. Yeah, well, let's get into it. We have something uncomfortable to talk about. This is turning into one of my favorite episodes to record, and I know listeners enjoy it because I get a lot of, whenever we do an episode, hearing from listeners about encounters with creeps and breaking them down, I get a lot of feedback. And usually that feedback comes in the form of more creepy stories of people. And I think tonight that's the fuel that's going to be firing us. When we did volume 3 of the Encounters with Creeps series, maybe it's probably 3 weeks ago or so that we did that, I just got inundated with stories of listeners' encounters with creeps or listeners' encounters with bad neighbors, because that was something we specifically asked for. So the bad neighbors thing's coming, but tonight we have a smorgasbord, a creepy salad, a kaleidoscopic image of creepy encounters with creeps that our listeners have had in their lives. Are you okay with this? You prepared to get into some awkward, cringy stuff?
Is this worse than last time? Because some of the stories last time, I was like, we're in sexual predator territory now.
I'll tell you, it's not any better than last time. It's rough. There's the difference tonight, I think, is that we have more stories than we did last week. A lot of them are shorter, but oh man, they're dark. It gets bad. But before we jump into the listener contributed stories, I looked into the news to be like, what creeps are actually gracing the pages of Canadian news reports. And I found one from your neck of the woods. It's not only cold in Saskatchewan, it's also quite creepy out there. I found the story of someone who seems like maybe the worst person, one of the worst people in Canada. We talked about Alex Bodger recently, who filmed the murder and gloated about it online. Awful Canadian. The man in this news story also comes across as quite an awful Canadian. Here's a story that was in the news out your way about a guy who was arrested and charged related to, I guess you would call it like hate-fueled harassment of a woman who was killed in a murder. And it was all done by basically spamming her obituary. Listen to this story and tell me if you understand what's going on here.
Robert Gordon had a lawyer appear on his behalf at Saskatoon Provincial Court Thursday morning in relation to 3 criminal charges laid after the body of Megan Gallagher was discovered. Megan Gallagher was reported missing in September 2020. Last September, her remains were found near St. Louis. 9 people have been charged in connection with her death, 4 for first-degree murder, and 5 others with indignity to human remains and aggravated assault. Megan Gallagher's parents, Deb and Brian Gallagher, say the family received a tip that someone was making hateful comments on a funeral page about their daughter shortly after her obituary was posted online. By the time they found out, the funeral home already informed police, but since all comments are moderated, these comments never made it to the website. Instead, the hate crime unit investigated and ultimately arrested Gordon in February for indecent communications. Police say race was an aggravating factor, so officers are seeking a harsher penalty. And because a search warrant was used, police seized some of Gordon's devices, which led them to arresting him again on April 6th, this time for possessing and making child pornography.
So let me get this straight. Is this guy is going on the funeral home's website, spamming hate-fueled comments on the obituary of a young woman who was recently murdered, to the point that the funeral home goes to the police take his computers and stuff, and then find that he was creating and accessing child pornography. What the hell is going on here? And who is this guy?
What a twist. And just when you think he can't get worse, he does.
Think about how pathetic the guy is that just sits with a funeral home's website open and just writing bad stuff about the person who was murdered.
Right? Like, I don't understand mean comments on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, but a funeral homes page, like an obituary, what? What are you doing?
And one that was the site, it said in the article, the site was there was moderation. So you would write something, it doesn't appear anyway. Someone has to look at it and be like, okay, that one's good.
What a satisfying domino effect, though.
They found it and they got a bad guy by the sounds of it. So that is our mainstream creep. We have another one that we'll come to later when it's thematically correct. But I want to jump into some listener creeps. This episode for this volume 4. I've divided the listener contributed creep stories into sections. Here are the sections we can get into. We have classic creeps, or maybe stereotypical creeps. We have some random touchers. We have some creepy customers, and then we just have some straight up creepy oddballs. I think we should save them for last.
Maybe you got to save those for last.
Maybe let's start with, do you want to do classic traditional creeps, or do you want to do creepy customers?
We'll start with creepy customers.
Okay,
they're kind of one and the same. So
the classic
creep.
I think the classic creep, when we get into those stories, you'll be like, oh wow, yeah, that is the traditional creep story. You'll see what I mean. But yeah, let's start with some creepy customers. This first story I'm going to call Autumn's Blonde Loving Creep.
I don't like this. I don't like this
already. Oh my gosh, and your hair's a little darker now, but you may be this guy's type, so buckle up. Here we go.
Hi Jordan, this is Autumn from Boston. This is a Encounters with Creep story. This happened several years ago when I was a sophomore in college. I was going to school in a small town in upstate New York. It was the middle of January, and I was bartending at one of the 3 local bars in town. This bar had a reputation of being pretty rowdy. A lot of younger students went there, and one night a man comes in, and he's probably late 30s, early 40s. At the beginning of the evening, he's sitting at the bar trying to engage me in conversation, but it's getting busier, and I'm slinging all these drinks, and so he starts mingling with all of these college students who are filling in. And I notice from my vantage point behind the bar that he's only approaching blonde girls. And I see him approaching them, asking to dance, flirting with them, and he's getting rejected, girl after girl after girl after girl. And during this whole evening, he's coming back to the bar periodically to chit-chat with me, and my boss makes the offhanded comment that this guy's really creepy. It's pretty unusual for a middle-aged man to be at this specific bar. It is very much a college bar, and so he thought it was creepy. Anyway, the end of the night comes, last call is made, and everybody clears out, and he approaches the bar once again, and he asks me for my number, asks me what I'm doing after my shift, and I'm a pretty frank person, so I tell him, what are you doing? I know your game. I've seen you all night approaching all these blonde girls. I'm also blonde, by the way. And I tell him, I was like, it's very clear that you have a thing for blonde girls and you couldn't get anyone else's number. And so I'm kind of your last option. I'm not going home with you. It's not happening. I see the game that you're playing. So he was surprised by this, and I was nice about it, but, let him know. And so he leaves. It takes about an hour to clean up the bar and close it down. And so after we do that, I'm getting ready to exit the building, and my boss happens to glance over at the security camera screen, and he's like, do not go outside. That guy is standing outside. And I was like, what? So I look at the screens behind the bar, the security camera footage, and I see this man standing outside at the corner of the bar, such that were I to exit the bar, I would not immediately see him, but he would be at a vantage point that he could very easily see me. And the way that he was positioned, he was between me and my car. And presumably was waiting outside either to approach me or, as I and my coworkers feared, to ambush me in the dark on the way to my car, because that area of the parking lot was not lit. And mind you, it is upstate New York in the middle of January. It is snowing. It is sub 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And all he has on is like a thin leather biker jacket and nothing else. And has presumably been standing outside for over an hour while we cleaned up the bar in the dark, waiting for me. Because there is not a single business open in the entire town. Most businesses close well before our last call. So he had nowhere to go except to stand outside in the snow, waiting for a barely 20-year-old college student to exit, in his mind, probably, hopefully by herself, to go to her car. And thankfully, my coworker is a larger guy, and so he goes outside. I don't know what he says to him, but he gets him to leave, and then my coworker walks me to my car. I never saw the guy again, but I can't help but wonder what his plan was. Sitting outside for an hour in the snow and the cold, waiting for me to get off my shift. For what? What was he planning? That's a lot of dedication to stand outside in the freezing cold and wait for somebody. It's a perfect storm for something very creepy, and I'm really glad that I never saw that guy again.
So you're a dirty blonde-haired woman who's worked at bars and stuff before. What was this guy planning to do outside? Why would he hang around like that?
I don't know what he was planning, God knows, but he was trying to shoot his shot again, at the very least. She said no, so I'm gonna try and convince her for whatever reason.
Well, yeah, I'll have a better chance convincing her when we're alone in this dark parking lot.
When I can corner her alone. Yeah.
That's awful. And there's no good reason why he's out there by the sounds of it. So she's lucky that someone had a security camera looking in the back, because it's, if this had been the 1960s or 70s or something, this could have had an altogether different ending. So many stories are like, and then she got off work and
Well, I've worked at a ton of bars, and I've never really, we've never been in a situation where we would, there was cameras, but we weren't always watching them. They would have been up in the office. But the bars that I've worked at, we always got walked to our car. It didn't matter what time it was, how many of us there were. We were always walked by a bouncer.
It should be that way. Yeah. Well,
it's unfortunate.
And the reason why is because they learned from experience that a young woman, or I'm sure a young man as well, can't be walking around outside places like that at night.
Yeah, exactly. And he knew. He's like, well, she's not going to be staying here. She's got to leave sometime.
Oh, that's creepy. This isn't the only creepy customer we're going to hear about. Let's talk about, we'll call this the lockdown creep of Victoria, BC.
Hi, Jordan. My name is V. I live in Ontario, Canada. I'm definitely a big fan of your podcast, especially the creep episodes. So I'm sending this voice clip because I wanted to share my own creepy story, which happened during the 2021 COVID-19 pandemic, when we were in lockdown, or color-coded lockdowns here in Ontario. So during that time, I was serving/hostessing at a local Kelsey's, and we were in that point of the pandemic where we were in the red control. So we were only allowed to have up to maximum 10 people in the restaurant. And it was by reservation only. So I had to turn away a lot of people who would walk in and call. So I remember one day, when I was hostessing during my 5-hour shift one Friday night, I get a call from some guy, and, he says, I tell him my name and everything, and he goes, hey, V, we want to have something to eat. Can we come and sit down in the restaurant? And I'm like, no. I'm like, you have to have a reservation only. And he's like, oh, well, can you make an exception? And I'm like, no, I can't. Right? And then he just turns around to me on the phone and goes, what if I finger you? Would you let me in the restaurant? And I just kind of lost it. Sexual harassment. And I kind of I told him off. I'm like, that is so inappropriate. But obviously, unfortunately, he had hung up on me while I was telling him off. So I don't really know if he heard what had happened. But it definitely scared me a little bit and freaked me out. I was visibly shaken. I remember I told my supervisor and I told my manager, and she was livid. She was like, what? She's like, that not to happen. She was pissed, pretty pissed. So unfortunately, I didn't write the person's number down, but we were able in our system to look for the number, or what we thought was the number, and we blocked it. So they weren't able to call the restaurant to try and make a reservation or anything like that. Well, what we thought was the number. So yeah, that was my little story of a creep on the phone. Didn't get a name or anything like that. Just sexual harassment. Anyways, thank you so much for listening and hearing my story, and hope you have a lovely day. Bye.
I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that.
Yeah, I should have warned you, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, that's awful. People are such scumbags, and someone was just he got the news he didn't like over the phone. He's like, "What can I say to get back at her that will like shock and disgust her because I'm, such a piece of crap?" And that's what he came up with.
like the poor women in his life. Could you imagine having to
Yeah.
know that man?
Well, you
I
know
would
what?
have I would have taken the number and posted it publicly and been like, "Does anyone know this number?"
Yeah.
Because
Is he yours? Because
yeah, someone
you
come get him. Like,
oh man,
yeah, he was going for shock value, and was he successful?
that's not
Wow.
it just like her telling us the story. We're both like, like when you hear that, I'm sure when she's on the phone with him, she's got all this stuff going around and someone just says that to you.
Well, like I couldn't imagine like poor V. I could like even just hear us hearing that, we're
It's like,
shocked. I would have gotten like a knot in my stomach. I would have been so anxious.
yeah.
What a weirdo.
What a creep.
What a creep.
Yeah, an appropriate story to share, V. Thank you. Uh, let's hear about another one. This is another customer that sucks, or customer slash coworker. This one's a little different. This one I'm going to call Mandy's Pizza Creep Creep. Here's why.
Hi, Jordan. I just wanted to say I love nighttime. You and handsome Aaron Airport are hilarious. I love your sarcastic humor. You and Madeline are amazing too. I love everything about your show. It's great all around. I was just listening to your Encounters with Creeps Part 2 and wanted to share some of my creepy encounters. I grew up with two sisters, so between the three of us, we have a lot of creepy stories, too many than any female should have. I wanted to share three of mine. The first one, when I was 17, I worked at a local pizza. There was this guy, Trevor, that also worked there. He was 33 at the time. One night I was working, Trevor was not. He came in and asked if I would stop by his house on my way home. Already kind of creeped out. I don't know why I went, but I did. I did have one of the drivers take me, though, and wait for me outside. Once I was in there, Trevor starts crying, telling me how I saved his life. He used to wake up every day thinking he didn't want to live, but since he has met me, how his outlook on life has changed and how I have saved him. I just thought, okay, this guy is really depressed. Somehow I helped him. A few days later, he shows up. I'm working, he's not, and he has this big bouquet of flowers and a card. In the card, he's again saying how I saved him, I've given him a reason to live every day, how he cares for me, how special I am, just inappropriate things for a 33-year-old man to be saying or writing to a 17-year-old child. Anyways, I went home after my shift, showed my mom, showed my stepdad. They obviously freaked out. My stepdad took me to the police station and we reported everything. We gave them the card and let them know the whole situation. The police said they couldn't do much because Trevor didn't act on anything. But they did follow up with us and they said they went to his house to talk to him and they warned him not to talk to me. I quit Pizza. I started working at a women's clothing store in the mall. And I did see him on a few more occasions, passing by, looking in, but he never did come to the store or try to talk to me again, thankfully. And then eventually I stopped seeing him.
Yeah, that's
My
something.
my brother in Christ, she was 17.
This guy must have had something going on, a mental illness or
Multiple
something.
things.
But then I'm also thinking, like, maybe it's just by this series warping my mind, where she's like, I left Pizza for a women's clothing store. And it's like, oh, well, we'll hear that story in the next episode.
Yeah, right. I think it was that's manipulation. He was trying to make her feel guilty into
Well,
like, I don't know, hanging out with him or whatever.
whatever he did, though, he seems to have come on quite a bit too strong. Like, it's one thing to be like, you're kind of cool. Like, yeah, you seem mature for your age. It's another thing to
There's
be
one
like,
thing to
you
have a
saved my
crush,
life. You saved
right?
my life and you give me a reason to live. Come to my place. Yeah.
That's like obsession stalker type deal. In a workplace?
Like it's probably her and two others,
Right.
this guy and hopefully some other person who sees what's going on and can step in.
Man,
But
in my experience, kitchen staff is either like super great or like super not. There is no in between.
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just there's something about these creep stories that involve a place of work, be it a customer or a coworker. It's not that catcalling when you're walking on the streets any better, but I just feel like when you're at work, you already got such a great reason to be miserable
Yep.
without having like you shouldn't even have to talk to people.
Well, and especially at work, and I think especially women, we feel obligated to be nice.
Hmm.
And yeah, especially in a place of work, we feel like it's our job to be nice, and it's
Yeah.
not.
So many guys would be quick to take advantage of that or get the wrong idea or something. It's like there's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's screwed up and warped. And yeah, I'll be honest, I'm glad I was born a male. I honestly feel like we got the better side of the deal.
Well, there's been some times like where thank God I haven't worked in a restaurant in a very long time,
You can
but
handle it. What I know about you, I could not imagine you doing that,
I would
honestly.
not last. Oh no, I'd be fired right away. I'd be like, this, I'm not cut out for this anymore. Like,
No, I
I could
can't
work at like a
imagine you
Dick's
doing it.
Last Resort. I could work somewhere like that.
What is that? I don't know. It must be a Saskatchewan weird thing.
Oh no, I think it's only in the States. I've been in Dallas and Vegas, and they're like allowed to be rude to the customers.
Okay, kind of
It's
like
wonderful.
what are those ones where it's like everyone's like knights and stuff? What are that?
Medieval times.
Yeah, isn't that like kind of
Mm,
a medieval times thing?
I don't know.
Like,
I've been there too, actually, but no, the staff wasn't rude.
okay, I thought medieval times are supposed to be rude to you or something.
No, no,
I've
not
never been
there.
there. I've never been there, so I have no idea. I just thought that's the way I thought that worked. But I would like to go to a place where people are well, not rude, but just like they don't. I don't want to make friends with anybody. So I'm okay if the waitress just came over and laid a piece of paper on the floor on the table with a menu and a pencil. I would be like, okay, I just got to write down what I want, and she'll bring it back there.
Right?
The whole thing is odd, but I could see how some waitress would come over to the table and be like, "You guys got any big plans later tonight?" And these bros at the table who've already had 4 beer with their slice of pizza are like, "Why? What are you doing?" You know, I just see it playing out. I hate this world.
Yeah, me too.
This series makes me hate it more. Misanthrope? Is that I'm misanthropic. I think that just means you don't like people.
Okay, me too. I've never heard that term before, but I'm going to adopt it.
Okay, here we go. That is it for the customer/coworker creeps. Let's go to what I call the classic or traditional creeps.
Oh, I can't wait.
Let's start. We're going to go back to the year 1970, and I'm going to take you to a little place called Cape Breton Island. This story takes place in Sydney, Cape Breton, the town I grew up in. And this is a very traditional pervert.
All the weird ones come from Cape Breton.
Right? Here we go.
Hi, Jordan. I've been listening to your creep stories and I love them. It's bringing up many creep stories for me, many I had forgotten. And listening to your program makes me remember things that have long been forgotten. Thank goodness most of them aren't traumatic. I do have one for you. It's Sydney, Nova Scotia, early 70s. My parents lived near the park on George Street, and I could drive my tricycle around the block, and I was about 3 or 4. One day I went for a drive around my block, and a man was parked across the street from our block, but out of view of my house. He called me over. He wanted me to go over, cross the street, and go to his car. My parents had trained me not to do such a thing, so I got off my tricycle and I ran home. I knew not to cross the street to see the guy, and I was worried that he stole my bike. So this is the creep part of the story. We're not 100% sure who the guy was, but Clifford Olson was in Sydney during that time. So it could very well have been a serial killer. So that's my creep story, or one of them.
Oh my God.
I'm going to go with, yeah, it was a serial killer.
Well, who calls a toddler over to their car outside of the site of their house? That is bizarre.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is maybe you see a toddler and you're like, do their parents know they're out here? Like, hey kid, everything okay? I don't
Right.
maybe that, but I can't imagine. That's one thing. There's never a reason to say like, hey kid, come over to my car.
Never.
Because
There is
if
no.
they can hear you, you can ask them the question. There's no reason to have the kid near your car.
Oh my God.
That's freaky,
That's
right?
as soon as she said she was like 3 or 4, I was, oh my God, I am so rattled.
Uh, and
I'm
then
convinced it was Cliff.
yeah,
I'm
and then
totally
yeah, and
convinced.
then as it turns out, there's a serial killer in that area who would. But you see what I mean by like a traditional creep story?
Yes,
Does
that
it get any
is
more what an uninventive creep?
exactly. I'm picturing people like peering through windows, but
Mhm.
that's way more
Well, like the
classic.
kid on tricycle and him being like, "Come
Yep.
on over to my car." Um,
Ugh.
it's not the only traditional derivative creep we're going to hear about. Here's another one. This takes place in 2002. Listen to this.
Hello, I am calling from BC, Victoria, BC. I wanted to call with a story about a creep, a female creep. This story takes place here in Victoria, British Columbia, and I'm assuming that the year is probably 2002. I am approximately 7 years old, walking home from school. And it was completely normal for me to be walking home alone from school because my school was just at the top of the hill from my house. And so if my mom really wanted to, she could take a peek out the front door and see me walking down the hill. But by the time that it is springtime and I'm in grade 2, we've been doing this for nearly 3 years. So I've been walking home from the school for nearly 3 years. And going back now as an adult in that neighborhood, I can see that it's not that far, and I would trust a 7-year-old to make it down the hill as well. So my mom was very sure to make sure that I understood that not all strangers are good people. So she always kind of made sure that I had a plan. We had a password so that if anybody ever came up in a car and said, your mom sent me to pick you up, I would say, okay, what's the password? And if they didn't have the password, then I wouldn't get in their car. Well, a lady pulls up. I'm 7 years old. I'm walking home. A lady pulls up, an older woman, very old, white hair. I remember her little, I swear it was like a little Buick, and it was like beige or champagne colored. Um, she had white hair and like a yellow jacket on, and she pulls up and she starts going on about how she asked me how old I was, and I lied and said I was in grade 3 because I thought that would make me sound more older and therefore safer somehow. Um, she starts trying to convince me that it's too far for me, such a young person, to walk, that I need to get into her car. And I just start saying, no, no. She pulls over, and at this point, I'm still 2 doors down from my house. So I just run into that house. I happen to know those people at least. I was just lucky that the door was unlocked. I just ran right in, and I had them call my mom 2 doors up. The lady sat outside and waited until basically she saw my mom come and get me. Um, my mom took down the license plate, and, spoke to the police, but nothing ever came of that. Um, yeah, so I almost got abducted back then, 2002.
So again, there's no good reason to try to get a kid in your car.
No, that's insane. And that is like what she was describing. She pretty much described like how exactly what my life was. We're pretty close in age, her and I. I would have been 9 in '02. And yeah, I lived like a block from my school and walked. And yeah,
I did
that's
as
just
I did as well, but I never walked alone. I walked with, like, I have an older brother who's like 3 or 4 years older, and then all of the neighborhood, like I lived on this dead end street and it was a lot of families like kind of the same age. So there was a lot of kids my age. So we would walk in a group of like 20 kids.
Oh, wow.
That ranged in age from like, I was usually one of the youngest and my brother was kind of around the oldest. So like with like maybe a 5-year span between us, we'd be a big pack of kids. So I never had kind of any of these experiences where I'd be alone walking down the street. Thank goodness.
That's bizarre. And as young ladies, we automatically think we can trust women, and we can't.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
yeah.
That's another caveat to this is it's not a man trying to get you in the car, it's a woman. And even as a male, when I was a kid, I would have been more trusting to a female for sure than a male.
Absolutely.
But that's not always the right thing to do. And I can't imagine that this lady had any good reason to get this kid in her car.
Yeah, no.
It's unsettling.
It's super unsettling because, well, like, just look at Carla Homolka.
Mm-hmm.
She abducted kids for her husband or whatever, or helped at least.
Well, it was like wasn't one of the kids with like a birthday present or something for her husband?
I think she gave him her sister for Christmas.
There is a lot of creeps, and Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka are two of them. As is whoever this woman in Victoria that tried to get this 7-year-old in her car. We did classic creeps. Earlier, we went through customer/coworker creeps. Are you up for some random touchers?
Ooh, no, but yes.
I'm sorry, but that's where we're going. Before I do, though, before we hear listener stories of random touchers, I have a mainstream story of a random toucher, because as it turned out, in the news just last week was the story of what I would call well, I guess not even what I would call, what is like a sexual assault spree. Not like grabbing a random person, but going on like a spree doing that. Listen to this story. It is certainly the tale of a creep.
After 7 sexual assaults in the span of 3 days, police have made an arrest. They believe one man is responsible for the spree that began in Burnaby before the suspect took the SkyTrain to Vancouver, and the crimes continued. CTV's Ben Nesbitt is live with more. Ben, some disturbing allegations here.
Andrew, police say the victims, who are of all different ages and ethnicities, reported having their private parts grabbed and slapped. They say these assaults were completely unprovoked. Burnaby RCMP and Vancouver police say 5 women were groped in the Metrotown area between March 31st and April 2nd. 2 other assaults were reported in Vancouver in the same time frame, along with 1 indecent act. Officers in both cities, along with transit police, say they worked together to track down the suspect. 27-year-old Hayden McCorriston has been charged with 7 counts of sexual assault, 1 count of assault, 1 indecent act, and 2 thefts.
This series of offenses was very concerning for police, given the short time frame that it happened, the wide range of offenses, as well as that it carried on from Burnaby to Vancouver.
Police say McCorriston, who has a lengthy criminal record, was already in custody when they identified him as the suspect. He'll remain behind bars until his next court appearance on July 5th.
When you hear like one instance of like grabbing someone or touching them inappropriately, that's one thing, but this idea of like going on like a spree, like from one city to another and just grabbing and slapping and touching all these people. Thank God they got this guy. But, you know, he has a lengthy criminal record, so he did a bunch of other crazy stuff and he was able to be free to grab and touch people. So yeah, I'm sure that's not the last society's going to have to deal with this creep.
No, I'm glad that he's being held until his court date, because usually they're just like, be good until court.
Yeah.
But
the pinky swear, the Canadian Justice pinky swear.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this is an extreme case of touching inappropriately and without invitation. We have some stories though, because it wasn't only the victims of this Dylan guy or Hayden guy. We have some listeners who also lived through some similar experiences. Let's start by going to meet with Cassandra in Texas. We're going to jump over the border here.
Hi, Jordan. This is Cassandra calling from Texas in the U.S. I'm calling to share my creepy story. I used to live in California, and I went to a nightclub one night with a bunch of friends, and it was super packed. And so there was a line of people going in one direction and then a line of people going in the other direction. So a guy that was going in the opposite direction from where I was going, he was with his girlfriend, and all of a sudden I felt him grab my hand. And he grabbed my hand and he put it on his private area and held it there. And I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything because it was so packed. And there were so many people in the nightclub. And he just looked at me and smiled and winked like it was no big deal. So it was just disgusting. I wanted to wash my hands and run home. Anyway, thanks, Jordan. Love your show. Bye.
It's neither here nor there, but he was with his significant other.
Yeah, what's that all about, right?
What?
She says, I wanted to wash my hands and run home. I can understand that.
I would want to burn the first layer of skin off of my hands.
I think when there's this kind of idea of like creeps feeling entitled and seeing women as objects of and such, I think this idea of, and something we see in some of our stories as well, is when you're in close quarters, it's an invitation for these creeps to stretch out a little bit. And we've heard several stories. I remember in volume 3, there was the guy who was looking at books with the young girl who kind of in a narrow aisle had to kind of slide behind her.
Right. And she was 9.
Yeah. And then when I hear this situation with Cassandra, it's taken that to a whole different level, but that anyone in their right mind could think that that's in any way appropriate or acceptable. That's straight up sexual assault. So it's
absolutely.
Like you go to jail for that, even if it's your first
Totally.
offense. Well, you should. In the US, you probably would. I don't know about in Canada.
Even the close quarters thing, it's funny you bring that up because my friend and I were just talking about it. Her and I go to a lot of concerts together, and they're usually packed. And I just said to her the other night, can we normalize not touching my waist when you want to get past me? Like,
yeah, like the hand, like, excuse me, dear. The hand on the look.
I'm just like, oh,
yeah,
God.
Buddy, I know what you're doing, you piece of.
Yeah, like you've got room. You just go. Like,
what are they like for someone to do that, to put their hand on your waist, to like, it's going to squeeze past you here? Like, are they worried that you're just going to like bump into them and knock them down? Or are they like, nails? I'm
static. I'm not moving around. Like, you're fine. Go past me without touching me, without talking to me. Like,
yeah, let that be a lesson to the people out there. If you're walking past someone, there's no need to touch their waist. And even if you want to prevent them from bumping into you, the waist wouldn't be the right spot to really control. It would be more their like back maybe or something.
Yeah, shoulder me. Do something. Yeah. Like, not keep away from my waist.
That's not the only story of touching creeps that we're going to hear about. This one also involves a confined space, it being a bus stop. Look out.
Hi, Jordan. It's Mandy again. You were talking about, or there were some stories about public transportation, and it just reminded me of another creep. When I was in my early 20s, I was attending driving school, a little bit later for driving school. But after my class, I was waiting for my bus at the bus stop, and I was sitting on the bench and had this feeling, like that feeling you get that someone is watching you. So I turn around, and there's this guy behind me, like right very close behind me, standing behind me. So I scooted down to the other end of the bench, thinking this guy's just that type of person that doesn't recognize personal space. Okay. So this kid rides by on his bike and does a double take as he passes by me. So I turn around and this guy is right behind me again, like right behind me. So at this point, I'm like, red flags. What's this guy doing back there? So I stood up and I walked away from him, but I'm still waiting for my bus at the bus stop. I see the bus approaching from down the street, and then suddenly this guy runs over toward me and grabs one of my boobs. I was like completely caught off guard, totally shocked. Like, I did not think he was going to grab me like that. He starts running through the houses that were like behind the bus stop. So it just caught me off guard. I started yelling. I was chasing him. And then I realized, okay, wait, I need this bus to get home. And I'm 5 feet tall, like 105 pounds. What am I possibly going to do even if I catch this guy? So I get home, I called the police to report it. They did come to my apartment. They took my statement and asked me to go to the police station the next day to look at pictures of, I guess, people that have had priors. I did go in the next day. I didn't see him in any of the pictures that they had given me. And there was a female officer helping me from the sexual assault department. So we were just talking after. She was asking me questions. She asked me where I worked. I worked, and I still work, at a mental health hospital. So she says to me, shouldn't I be used to this kind of behavior because of where I work? Looking back, I probably should have reported her just for her completely inappropriate, non-supportive comment. Not only is she a female, but she's working in the sexual assault department, just completely inappropriate. I wish I reported her, but I didn't.
I hate when misogyny comes from inside the house.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, girl?
Yeah. And what about the actual story? Like this guy creeping up behind her to reach around and try to grab at her boob. Like, not try to. It sounds like he accomplished it.
Oh my God. Like, why? What are people thinking? Well, they're not, clearly.
I think it's this like no respect at all for other people, and they just get it in their
like
head.
An entitlement thing.
It may be like something between entitlement and like a psychopath. So, or maybe like a mix of the two. Like, 'cause no one would think like, you may feel entitled to like touch someone's waist as you go by them, but like to reach around and grab them like in this way that's a
whole different ballpark.
Psychopathic.
Yeah. That's just.
This is an awful night.
The poor girl's waiting for a damn bus. Like, ugh.
Yeah. That's it for the random touchers. But let's move on to the odd balls. If all of these other creeps aren't odd enough, I have a whole group that I've simply classified as the odd creeps. I have the story of a sex doll, the story of a Rocky Horror Picture Show nudist, and the story of an almost roommate.
We got to start with the sex doll. Okay, this is intriguing me.
Yeah, well, good, because it's short and sweet. It's a perfect one to choose. Listen to this.
Hey, Jordan. I have a pretty outlandish creep story for you. And if there are kids listening, they should stop, like, right now, because this escalates almost immediately. I used to work at a garage in Halifax. A lot of weird stuff happened there. But one day, a man walked in. He was probably about 65 or so. And he had this half blown up sex doll. And he had clothes on it. Like, actual clothes. He dressed it. So, I'm already like, man, this tops any weirdness that has ever happened. Like, you just hit it out of the park. So he comes up to me, puts the sex doll on the counter, bleh, and proceeds to ask me if I will take it into the garage and put air in it. And I'm going, there's no way in hell I am touching that thing. So I tried to be polite because I didn't know, like, has this man lost his goddamn mind? Is somebody fucking with me? Or is he actually that weird? So I just kind of politely declined. And he started getting angry. And he told me that I was discriminating against his blow-up girlfriend, because he did refer to it as his girlfriend, and that I was a bigot for not being open-minded enough to go in and blow it up, and not to be a prude because she was wearing clothes, so it was totally not inappropriate. Yeah, I still don't know, man. But that's my story.
What's wrong with the gas station?
Or a bike pump or something. When I heard this story, I was thinking it had to be like one of the coworkers. Like, I think this should be in the creepy customer, creepy coworker section, but I feel like a coworker had to set her up for this or something. Because like, if you're, for whatever reason, imagine you're someone who has a sex doll that's your girlfriend, and you needed to get air for it. Would you not go to get a bike pump or something? Like, I don't know how they inflate.
How have you blown her up before? It looks like you've had her for a while.
To go
like,
to a mechanic, and a mechanic would have like a high pressure like thing for filling tires. Your poor girlfriend, your inflatable girlfriend would explode.
I was just gonna say, she should have taken it and overfilled her.
That's a good idea.
That would have been wonderful.
I do believe that this was a setup. That's what I'm going with.
I'd like to believe that, but like, and that is definitely something that I could see my friends doing to me, but they would let me know after, because we would all want to have a laugh together, right?
Yeah.
Like, where's the punchline?
Yeah, exactly. So if it isn't a setup, then what the hell's with this guy? Why would you do this?
This is one of those things. This is one of those things, exactly, where like, whatever blows your skirt up, if your fetish is your fetish, but you can't be including others without their consent. Like,
yeah, just go get a bike pump or something. It's
I'd like try another garage. I don't know what to tell you, brother. Like,
I can't get involved in this. It's a crazy story. Let's go.
To call her a bigot, that's bizarre.
Yeah, that's golden. Let's hear about Jenny's Rocky Horror Picture Show creep. Listen to this.
Hi, Jordan. This is Jenny from Ontario. I have an encounter with a creep that I would like to share with you. So this goes back a couple of years. My husband and I were in Stratford, Ontario, seeing the Rocky Horror Picture Show on stage. We had left the theater. We were walking back to our Airbnb. We were in costume, full makeup, walking down a very dark residential street. And up ahead, we saw some movement. And my husband likes to try and creep me out all the time. So he says, "Oh, I think that was like a naked person running down the street." And I said, sure it is. We continued walking. And then, sure enough, this naked man starts walking towards us in a very direct and intense way. He walks right up to us. He had a look on his face like he was probably high on some sort of methamphetamine. And he stopped, and I screamed. I couldn't stop myself. And then he screamed back at me. So I took off running. I just ran across the street, over to where there was a house with some lights on in the front area. My husband said after that he didn't even realize that I had run away. He stood and looked the guy in the eyes and told him to just keep going down the street. And so that's what the naked man did. And then my husband was looking around for me, and I emerged from the bushes across the street where I had run over to. And we proceeded to call the police and let them know that this had happened. And they said we were not the only ones to report that night. So that was creepy.
My favorite part of that is she just dipped on her husband. Leave the weak behind.
He has to handle it.
Yeah.
Well, her and the naked man seem to, they just look at each other. She screams and he screams back. He's probably just, I don't know what's going on, but I have a feeling he was as startled as she was.
Well, and because this is about Rocky Horror, I'm picturing like a naked Tim Curry in drag running toward them.
Yeah. Well, this guy, I don't know, the naked man, I don't know if he had anything to do with the Rocky Horror Picture Show event that happened. She just happened to be in costume, which just adds this other strange layer to it. But have you ever been out in the wild and encountered a completely naked person?
Yes, in Greece. A man exposed himself to my friends and I.
On the beach.
Yeah, an old guy.
I was in a cab once in Halifax. We were driving down the street and it was at night. So it's a dark street and the headlights are just kind of illuminating, a narrow path kind of down the road. And then just a guy walks from like the sidewalk which wasn't bright into the street, completely butt naked. And he just stood like facing the cab with a huge, what I would call a shit-eaten grin, just this big smile, like laughing. He was certainly on something or drunk out of his mind.
I hope so.
I was waiting to look over to the side and see like all of his friends filming the prank, and it's like, oh no, he is alone.
Oh my God.
The cab driver laid on the horn until the guy stepped out of the way and we just drove away. And the cab driver, like, no reaction at all. Almost like every night driving this cab with these lunatics.
Right. Just another day.
Another day. Yeah. But I'm glad she managed to get away and her husband heroically stepped in to tell Buddy to get out of there.
Keep going.
So I decided to end on this next story for a few reasons. For one is in volume 3 of the Encounters with Creep series, we did a call out for people to tell us stories about bad neighbors. I want to add bad neighbors and bad roommates. I want to include roommates in that because I think we could really get a good collection of stories about people's horrific neighbors and horrific roommates. I have more than a few. In fact, just last week, the fire department showed up at my house as thanks to my own personal bad neighbor. I know you have plenty of stories. I know listeners have stories about bad roommates, bad neighbors. So before we get into the final story, which involves an almost neighbor that is a creep, I want to again appeal to compel anyone with stories of creeps, bad neighbors, or bad roommates to go to the website nighttimepodcast.com, click on the word contact, and tell me your story in a voice memo. Because I would do one of these a month. I would love to.
You're going to be flooded again because there's a lot of weird roomies out there.
Oh, there is, man. What's worse than a bad roommate? And everybody's had one. Just like everyone's had an encounter with a creep, at least every female. Everybody has had a bad roommate.
Yeah.
I've had more than my share. Well, this next story, fortunately, they don't become a roommate. We're going to call this story Shannon's almost creepy roommate. And not that he was almost creepy. The creep was almost her roommate.
Hi, Jordan. My name is Shannon, and I am from the Atlanta, Georgia area of the United States. I am a fairly new listener, and I really enjoy your Canada series on Keep Canada Weird. I actually really love Aaron. No offense to any of those haters out there. Aaron, I got you, man. You're the best. Anyway, I'm calling because of your new series, Encounter with Creeps. A couple years ago, I was looking for somewhere to live, a possible roommate. Again, it's very impossible to find somebody decent as a single 45-year-old woman who is barely 5 foot tall. Anyway, so I was on Craigslist looking in different websites, Facebook, whatnot, and I got a bite from a guy out in this very isolated area of Georgia. So I reluctantly answered the ad thinking, well, the rent's pretty cheap. It was $400 for, a 2-bedroom apartment, et cetera, et cetera. So I went out there, and the minute I found the apartment complex, I felt uncomfortable. I just felt really uneasy, gut feeling kind of thing. 90s kid, intuition. So anyway, long story short, the guy answered the door, and he literally looked like a serial killer right from the bat. And I literally caught that vibe from him by looking past him and seeing a series of exercise bikes in his living room. Not just one, there were 6 of them. So please explain that to me. Really. I immediately backed out of there and left. And now I have this crazy story to tell my friends about this guy that looked like John Wayne Gacy with all these exercise bikes outside. Anyway, love you guys. Bye.
I don't think I can explain that.
Trust your spidey senses.
My only explanation is maybe it's like kind of like a fitness cult who lives there, and every night they go in their living room and get on the bikes, and they were like trying to recruit a woman, and maybe they got.
Why would you need more than one?
They got a lead. They got a lead on a 7th bike, and they're like, we just need her to ride it. I can't think of any good reason to have 6 exercise bikes in your living room.
I can't think of a good reason to have one, if I'm being honest here.
Yeah, for real. I can't imagine what this man had planned for her in those bikes. If she did move in, I'm glad she didn't. That would be enough to turn me away for sure as well.
Oh, yeah. I'd be like, this is the living room I'm supposed to live in?
Oh, the serial killer with all the bikes.
Yeah. Oh.
If they were pedal bikes, I'd be like, those are probably like the bikes of his victims. But they're exercise bikes. It's even weirder.
Right? Yeah. Well, and that just goes to show that, like, we know people are weird, but people in their natural habitat are just something else.
Well, that's why a Weird Neighbors / Weird Roommates series would work, because you get to, with roommates, you get to, and in some cases are forced to go in the habitat of people you don't want to be in their habitat, and you can live to tell about it, and we would love to hear those stories.
There's
have you had many roommates?
I've only had 2, and they were at the same time. One I don't talk to anymore, and one ended up she's still my best friend, one of my best friends. She was my bridesmaid. But so
that's boring. Go back to the one you don't talk to about anymore.
We did get along. Like, we all 3 of us partied together all the time, and then it just, I don't know, it fizzled out. She got a little weird, and it just, yeah.
Well, maybe she'll call in and tell me about you and why she got weird.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, if I haven't had a weird roommate story, maybe I was the weird roommate.
That's definitely it.
But she just kept everything. Like, I remember we were cleaning up our disgusting kitchen one night, and there was just like this little, like, I don't know, it was like a Tupperware container for leftovers, and it was like orange tinted because it was so old and stained and whatever. And my other roommate was like, I'm throwing this out. And the other roommate was like, no, you can't. That's an heirloom. My parents got that for their wedding.
Oh, when Tupperware.
And we're like, it's Tupperware.
That sucks. That sucks.
So yeah, it's just nothing crazy, but it's just like, okay, shit like that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure listeners will come through. I'm going to put a link in this episode description for anyone who wants to share a story about a creep, about a weird roommate, or a weird neighbor. Let's see where this brings us.
Well, I thought of one, actually. I can't believe I hadn't thought about this because I was like 5. But after the one woman told us about when she was like 3 or 4, it reminded me of, so it would have been my sister's 8th birthday. So I would have been 4. And she had like her little party at this like hair salon where you invited all your friends and you all got your hair done or whatever. So obviously I was invited by default. I'm her sister.
Yeah.
But where this little hair salon was, there's a bar right beside it.
Oh my God.
And it was like midday in the afternoon, probably on a Saturday. And this woman comes in loaded, like just super drunk, comes and sits down, and she sees me and she's like, oh my God, she's so cute, takes me from my mother and puts me on her lap. And I remember looking at my mom, and my mom was like, I don't think she likes that. So then my mom goes to take me back, and this woman stands up with me and starts to leave. I remember hanging on to the door frame of the salon. She was trying to take me out of the freaking salon.
Wow.
I guess I've just kind of blocked that out. It was weird.
You've never told me about this, and this is our
No.
third one of these. And did that just come back to you?
I think it maybe crossed my mind in an earlier episode, and I was like, oh, that's not a good story to tell. But no, it is. It really is.
It's very suitable. Oh yeah. Well, that's your traditional creep, I guess. That would have fit the classic creep series.
Yeah.
Tried an abduction.
Almost got abducted. Yeah.
By like a drunk, probably really like happy lady.
She was, until my mom didn't want her touching me.
Oh my goodness.
She got pretty angry when she wasn't allowed to take me home.
To do your hair.
I guess.
I'll sit her on my exercise bike and do her hair. Oh, what a world we live in.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
It's always something when I have you here, Madelayne. And, this collection of creep stories, it's given us a lot to stay in our houses about.
If I didn't like to stay at home before, this is not helping my hermit state.
Well, I guess if our listeners can come through with the weird neighbor and weird roommate stories, not even staying at home will be safe. And we'll have to advocate for crawling in a hole.
Oh, and there's so many of them. You can't even be safe in your own home.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up with that thought. Madelayne, it's always, how did we put it before? A pleasant nightmare when
Something
we're together?
like that. And it is.
Yeah, it is. This has been fun. Thank you, Madelayne, for suffering through some of these stories. Especially thank you to all the listeners who came through with your dark moments for us to be glad we weren't involved in them.
I hate to say I enjoyed this, because I shouldn't, but I do enjoy these episodes.
You're sick.
I know.
I want to thank you for joining Madelayne Klein and I for this episode of Nighttime. I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before I do, I have some thanks. First, a huge and sincere thanks to everyone who took their time to share their creep encounters with us. These stories serve as a great reminder for everyone out there to keep their eyes open and our wits about us. And to other listeners who may have a story to share, I plan to do a 5th, 6th, and probably even 7th part in this series, and I'd love to feature your story on one of them. You can send Madelayne and I a voice memo at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. And it doesn't have to just be a creep story. We're also looking for awful neighbors and awful roommates. So if you got something to share, go to my site now, nighttimepodcast.com, click contact, and you'll see the voice recorder. It's easy to use, and if you make any mistakes or misspeak or anything, I'll edit it before it goes to air, and I'll make sure we all sound our best. So give it a shot. We hope to hear from you. Now, the next thanks goes to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and to LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides this series' intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you to everyone who's listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Chandel, Emma, and Kay, thank you for going premium. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, let me tell you about a variety of ways you can do it. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs only a couple dollars a month and both funds the creation of the show while giving you access to an ad-free 2-day early release date with a full back catalog of Nighttime episodes. And if you don't want to go premium, you can help keep the show alive by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting like-minded friends know about the great work we're doing here. If you have any story ideas, if you want to give feedback on the show, or would like to contribute a question or comment to be aired and responded to in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.